Good evening. My name is Madeline Day Delpha, and I am the Assistant Director of Programs and Community Engagement at the Rose Art Museum. I am thrilled to welcome everyone to this evening's program with Hannah Levy, the fascinating, provocative, and visionary artist, in conversation with Dr. Gannit Ankori, the Henry and Lois Foster Director and Chief Curator of the Rose Art Museum. Hannah Levy received a BFA from Cornell University and a Meisterschüler title from Stadtschule in Frankfurt am Main, Germany. With recent solo exhibitions at the Berkeley Art Museum and Pacific Film Archive, California, and the Arts Club of Chicago, the artist has been included in exhibitions at CCS Bard Hessel Museum, Annandale-on-Hudson, New York, the Rennie Museum, Vancouver, Canada, the Aldrich Contemporary Art Museum, Ridgefield, Connecticut, MoMA PS1, New York, New York, among others, and was invited to participate in the 59th Venice Biennale in 2022 and the 16th Lyon Biennale of Contemporary Art, also in 2022. Levy's work is included in public collections including the Nevada Museum of Art, Reno, Nevada, Moderna Museet, Stockholm, Sweden, the Louisiana Museum of Modern Art in Denmark, the National Gallery of Victoria, Melbourne, Australia, the Falara Foundation, Düsseldorf, Germany, and the G2 Kunsthalle, Leipzig, Germany. Hannah's work is included in the exhibition Fabricated Imaginaries Crafting Art right here at the Rose Art Museum, alongside the work of Chris O'Feely, Nick Cave, Judy Chicago, Ava Hesse, Yayoi Kusama, Jeffrey Gibson, Theaster Gates, and many others. We hope you will come to the Rose to see this exhibition if you haven't already. This work must be seen in person, and the exhibition is open until May 31st, 2026. Hannah, Gannit, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Maddie, so much. And thank you also to Minen Gordon, who is doing all the technology for us. And welcome, Hannah. Welcome, everyone. I'm thrilled that you're here. Your work is generally just fascinating. And as I tell people, when I see a Hannah Levy sculpture, I know it's your work. It looks like nothing else that anyone does. And to have you find your distinct visual language and that consistency, I mean, you develop, but still it's consistent. It's the language of Hannah Levy is wonderful. And we're so proud to include it in this group show. I don't want to talk too much about Fabricated Imaginaries, crafting art, but the work is international. We have over 30 artists represented. They come from Africa and the African diaspora, Asian diaspora, some Native American artists. Here you see a Malaysian artist, the wonderful Anne Summit, next to a 1965 Kusama, very early Kusama. And then we see your work as it is in our Lower Rose Gallery. All the works here, all the works are actually, they occupy this liminal space between fine arts tradition and craft tradition. They occupy more than one categories at a time. And they often have this hybrid quality, both in what they form and the original materials that the artists use to create art. And I wanted to start with your perspective on this phrase, crafting art, undoing those hierarchies that Western art adopts between fine arts and craft traditions, and also your use of materials. So please.
Well, first of all, thank you, and thank you, Maddie, as well. Yeah, so when I think about my work and its relationship to craft or kind of an unusual use of fine art or non-fine art materials, um, I guess I really have embraced that relationship. My work is uh, to me, extremely craft oriented at the end of the day. And I think sometimes in the art world, that's almost seen as like a craft is almost a bad word. But to me, similar to my relationship with design, which I have really embraced in my work, I've also really embraced craft and basically just craftsmanship. My work is all basically all handmade, mostly by me, and often with the help of an assistant. But it's very the material plays a huge role in it, and my kind of understanding of the material also plays a big role. There are some kind of conceptual elements that I'm bringing to it too, but the material itself and kind of the unusual pairing of materials, I'm often using metal and something kind of softer or more organic, whether that's silicone in this piece or, sometimes glass in more recent work. Um, yeah, I'm pretty open to different classifications and different materials that might have unusual relationships to what's traditionally understood as sculpture.
Right. And other works in this show, for example, Eva Hesse and Chiharu Shiota, also use metal, sometimes geometrical shapes of metal, and then juxtapose it with softer materials like tubing or string and break that rigidness that's often associated with high modernism or a kind of masculinity, maybe. Although we can talk about gender, but later. You have been using in this work specifically silicone, and I have a detail that really, as Maddie said, you have to come see the work in person because all our attempts to show it through photography are not going well. The silicone really takes on the property here of ostrich skin or leather. I don't know what you call it. So when we look at the work, as people do, here you see the kind of almost life-size, little small, but this relationship, not just to a work, but to the body of the viewers. It looks like a dress, but it also looks like skin. Can you talk about this choice of material and this doubling of dress skin? Dress is often seen as a second skin in fashion theory.
Yeah, so the material, the silicone that's in this piece is cast from a sheet of like a fake ostrich leather, so basically ostrich pleather. So that's what gives it its kind of chicken skin appearance. And I've actually kind of tried to accentuate it in this piece because there's basically the silicone is cast in two layers. So the dots or the skin is actually pink and the background silicone is yellow. So they stand out. I was trying to get it to stand out a little more and get the kind of texture of the object to be very apparent. There's something funny about the fact that when we see leather furniture, we don't really think about the fact that it's skin, but then casting from the leather, so removing it one step from what it is, which is literal skin, to silicone, makes it more skin or flesh-like in its appearance. And I have these kind of moments of play in my work that I find amusing and like to put in the work. I don't know if necessarily other people would think of it in the same way, but it keeps me entertained. Um, and so then, yeah, also in this case, the silicone kind of operates as something between the seat of a chair and like a slinky dress. And I like the idea of it being a chair that's both kind of walking and wearing something and a seat and, so precarious in nature that it's pretty clear it's not something that could ever actually be sat on by a body.
Hmm. And this idea of a hybrid, I don't want to say artwork, I want to say creature almost, right? Because it's zoomorphic, it's anthropomorphic, it takes on different shapes. And looking at these talons, or I guess that's what you call them, talons, and the sharpness of it, the softness versus the hardness, all these things make people's response very visceral when they come and see it. They're always surprised. On the other hand, it's very surreal, and we can understand why you were included in that wonderful exhibition in the Venice Biennale with a lot of surreal artists and who create these hybrid creatures. Can you talk to that? And I know that you've been working in this vein ever since you were in graduate school, right? I
Yeah,
mean,
ever
been
since
in your
college,
mind,
even.
even right.
So to me, a lot of the way that I think about or make sculpture is really trying to recreate these visceral moments. Part of the reason that this kind of tubular steel that I use was always and is still so attractive to me is because the way I think about sculptures as objects is really through furniture. I feel like furniture are the objects, or furniture pieces are the objects that we're most used to interacting with physically. So that's where the kind of polished tubular steel comes from, is that those are it comes from modernist furniture, which has become so ubiquitous that it's in some ways just furniture. So I like the idea that when you see something interacting with that tubular steel, you know exactly what that kind of material relationship is. You know the kind of slickness, but also the stickiness that that surface has if your hand is clammy or something. So the silicone kind of operates as almost a reference point for us to like project a body on, or just the knowing the way two materials feel together and seeing that in a sculpture is always pretty important to me. And the same thing with the talons. It's just we all know what sharp metal feels like and how that exists in contrast to like a hard polished floor.
Mm, yeah. And it's really interesting because chairs are shaped to contain a body, and then you take the chair and you transform it into a body, and you use the hard, cold, kind of industrial metal and juxtapose it with something that is like the skin of an animal. And we can't help but think of the skin of a person because it's like a woman's dress.
Mhm.
And those things have a lot of emotional resonance. Um, how do you feel when you make them? What are your ideas? I can tell you how the audience responds, but what, yeah, I mean, in college, these were the images that were like waiting to come out. And very, very, very soon on, you found a visual language that was conducive to bringing form to these ideas.
Well, I guess when I'm working on them, I'm thinking kind of like, as you mentioned, my relationship with surrealism. I'm also thinking about kind of the uncanny nature of certain forms and taking elements that are familiar and putting them in unfamiliar positions. And I kind of think of my work as every piece I make is kind of a collage of different references to me, all jumbled together. And just because it's not necessarily important to me that in a piece like this, someone might be able to say, okay, I see that it looks like a dress, it looks like chicken skin, it looks like claw feet, and it looks like a chair. But so in some pieces, it's more apparent what those kind of combinations of familiar forms I'm putting together are. And I think in other pieces, it's less obvious to kind of make that list, but it's also like kind of a sexy lady like walking. And I like that, or I try to also have works like this contain some kind of movement in them because that's kind of a challenge when you're making a static object. So those are kind of the list of things I'm thinking about when I make a piece, but it's not necessarily so important to me that you be able to look at the work and pinpoint that list as much as see the work and see these familiar forms in it that then might resonate with someone.
Mm. Um, so when we received instructions how to display the work, the gallery was very clear that we should not put it on a pedestal and that we should not put stanchions around it. And I have to tell you that that has made our life difficult because
I'm
people
sure.
come and they really, really want to, sometimes they just want to touch it. Sometimes they want to hug it. Sometimes they want to do other things with it. Why was it important for you that the artwork share space with the visitors and not be put on a pedestal or put within stanchions that separate the artwork?
Well, I guess as far as the pedestal goes, really when I'm making the work, the height of the work is pretty important to me, as you can tell in that image that you had of people standing around it. It's a chair, but it's a little bit like narrower than a chair. It's almost like a petite figure. So the kind of scale that I'm working with is always something that's really important to me. And I feel like when something is on a pedestal, suddenly you lose a bit of the relationship between yourself as someone with a body and kind of the sculptural presence itself. But then also, I've found that because the references that I'm picking up on in most of my work is so kind of furniture oriented, and I'm really playing with these objects that we see and interact with in our everyday life. If you put like a stanchion around it, it's almost made of the same material and often the same tubular steel or has the same properties. And uh, not that it gets confused with the work, but there's something about it that ends up almost being too similar, if that makes sense. So,
Yes,
you
you see
know,
the stanchion here. It's
right.
tubes, right?
Yeah. So I'll, if something has to have things around it, it's fine. But I also like the kind of tension with the viewer of wanting to touch or interact with something and not necessarily being able to. I think specifically part of the reason I like that tension is that I really don't think you need to touch it. Like maybe if you touched it, you would feel the softness of the silicone, but I think you can see that in the way the silicone is displayed. Maybe you'd feel the slickness of the steel. Again, I think you can feel that. Or maybe you would even kind of try to push it over and see that it's standing as is, it's not going anywhere. But if you wanted to push it, you could, because the way that it's kind of on those little tiny pinpoints on the floor is really how it is. And so the kind of precarious nature of it is really a, a part a part of it, and you can see that visually. You can also see it to the touch. But I like that even if you might want to touch it, you might not even really get any additional information from that because I feel like visually anything you could get from touch is coming across pretty clearly.
It's true. It's true. It feels really tactile and fragile, but also strong, and also the attraction and repulsion. So it is making our visitors feel a lot. With your permission, I want to talk about the silicone a little bit more and move to this example of a performance that you organized at PS1. Um, do you want to talk about it and describe it for us?
Yeah, so I think I like that we're talking about this image in particular because as much as we were just talking about the material of the metal and the silicone at the end of the day, the piece I have in the exhibition is also a chair and a dress. And so my relationship with clothing and specifically silicone clothing is something that this piece touches on in a even more direct way. Um, Basically, I had these very long and very heavy jackets that I had included in a chair sculpture and was asked to include it in a group show at PS1. And when the curator, Jocelyn Miller, came to my studio, I was like, my real dream would be to have this jacket not just as part of a sculpture, but actually performed with, so in action. These jackets, you can't tell from the image, but they're actually about 60 pounds each. So performing in them was really an endurance exercise. And of course, this was a summer show and it ended up being one of the hottest days of the year. So I was, you know, very grateful that the performers put up with me. But also the idea that I talked to Jocelyn about was um, that it was important for me to have the work performed in rather than kind of just like a fashion show of the work or something. I collaborated with a choreographer for this piece. Her name is Phoebe Bergland, and she was someone whose work I had admired for a while, and I specifically wanted to work with her on this because her performers move in an often very slow and weighted way and had very serious facial expressions. And something you can't tell from this image um, is that when someone is walking in these very long, tall, floppy boots or very heavy, long-armed, floppy jackets, the pieces make this kind of ridiculous noise and flop around in a way that to me is like really funny. And so having her performers have such serious faces and such kind of weighted and slow movements in these ridiculous floppy costumes was something I was really excited to play with her. And also I kind of think of the way that my sculptures react and that there's often like a metal armature and then a cast or kind of squeezed or other material component that they're interacting with. I like to think that both materials are kind of acting on each other with a similar affect rather than one being kind of a pedestal or hanger for the other, which is more how it would be to me if I just had a model wearing it rather than collaborating with a performer who's really moving in it. It's kind of the two sides of my sculpture, the way they support each other. I see the performers, the choreographer, and the kind of ridiculous outfits I made them wear.
Mm. I think it's really powerful that in the sculptures you implicate the absent body. I mean, there is no body, but there's a body there that we imagine. Sometimes we kind of think of our own body as being implicated by the sculpture. And here it's bringing the human body back into play in motion. And there's always that tension between the heaviness, say, and the humor, or the stretching and the pulling, and the pain and the laughter. There's always more than one affect to the sculptures and the performance, which I find really, that tension is such an important part of what activates your art. So now we decided to go chronologically from 2016. Um, and again, when we discussed your work in college and generally you're moving into a new studio now, one of your one of your ideas is that you want to make everything yourself. So you want to have a self-sufficient space where you can do the metalwork yourself, where you can make those, cast the silicone, stretch them, etc. So here's the work we have at the Rose now is from 2020, but already 4 years earlier, we have another untitled piece that conjures up kind of bodysuit, if you will, with this smooth silicone and the nickel-plated steel. And it looks like a dress, a chair, a body, or an absent body.
Yeah, so in this piece, I was also playing with the idea of kind of uh, the furniture itself being a body, like you were talking about, or a stand-in or absent body. In my work, I think about kind of bodily awareness a lot. And like we were talking about earlier, these tactile moments of bodily tension. So I kind of liked the idea, anyone who's ever, tried to wear something kind of tight or in latex knows how kind of uncomfortable that is or how tight it is. So I like to create an object or chair that really has that in and of itself. There's also kind of this like sexiness that exists in design a lot of the time. So part of it, I was playing with that of like if we're going to live in a world that even tries to make chairs sexy, why not go all the way there and put it in kind of a thong bodysuit that zips all the way down. But I also just as because craft is in the title of the show, I think also that um, a lot of the reason that I was originally attracted to this tubular steel and modernist furniture in particular was, at least in the beginning of my making, because my skills were relatively limited. As you just mentioned, I do make most of this work myself, and at least for sure, the first few years of my career, it was super important to me to kind of be self-sufficient in that way, just from a very practical point of view, that's how it makes sense to make work on a budget. And so those kind of practical considerations became part of my practice. And part of that is that the modernist designers that I was originally so drawn to, part of my attraction to their forms was that they were so simple, and that simplicity allowed me, as a relatively new welder and sculptor, to make forms that referenced their furniture, while also existing within my skill level at the time. So this is from 2016. It's now almost a decade later, and you'll see I'm now able to get the metal to um, be kind of organic and have kind of an affect in and of itself. Whereas to me, some of these earlier works, I think this is the earliest one we've included in the presentation, show kind of a different relationship I had to metalwork at the time.
Mm. And this really, I want to say amazing, but I think I want to say disturbing as well. Um, of these really, I mean, those talons, those hands, and the fact that the silicone is like being stretched and here the bump, I almost feel like that silicone being, it almost looks like a torture bed, just trying to get it all there. But then it's also funny in a way. What were you thinking?
Well, so the kind of not discovery, but I guess the first time that I started including these kind of claw forms in my work was a really exciting moment for me. I think I probably used them for the first time in 2018, and this piece is 2019, so it's pretty new. And really, kind of what I was talking about with my the limitations of my skill at certain point. at certain points in my kind of making, uh, the the claws really were the answer to a lot of problems I'd had before or kind of questions I was trying to overcome because they allowed me and still allow me to put in some kind of like additional affect or something in the metal itself. So all of a sudden, the metal has the possibility to have gesture,
Mhm.
whereas previously that wasn't something I was focusing on so much. I feel like since then, I've been able to create gesture in ways outside of just the claw hands. But these in particular felt like a really big breakthrough to me in that way. And then, yeah, as you were talking about this, it's kind of coffee table size. And I chose to make the kind of intersection of all the legs higher than the point at which the kind of D rings that are holding the silicone lies at. So you get this kind of uncomfortable bump. And in person, the you can see that the silicone is not transparent, but a little translucent in the middle. So you can really see the kind of X of the center of this table-like thing in the middle. And I think that was just a way to really show that moment of tension
Right.
in a more pronounced way.
And talk about uncanny. It's alive. And if before the silicone was the element, I mean, there are two materials. The silicone was the live one, the anthropomorphic one, and the metal, the steel, was kind of inanimate. And all of a sudden, it's alive as well. And the
Right.
interaction kind of changes in a way. And I feel like as viewers, it really implicates us. You can't be just blasé when you walk by. You kind of feel it in your body. Um, and this one is just even more pronounced. This is from the same year, 2020, as our work. And yeah, can you talk to us about the gourds that you used and those kind of uneven twists and turns?
Yeah. So again, like I was saying before, just because we're doing this in chronological order, the kind of very straight nature of the like bends and the way I was able to manipulate the metal earlier, you can see that my kind of fluidity with the material is really increasing as things go along. And this kind of organic bend was something I had been trying to work out for a while. This was from an installation at my first exhibition at my gallery in New York, Casey Kaplan. It was my first time, it was my first encounter with the space. And when I'm entering a new space to make a show, I really start with the building itself or the space itself. And it has a very kind of long, narrow entryway. And I liked the idea of hanging these kind of three oversized chandeliers in it to make the long, narrow, dramatic space kind of feel smaller or just really play with the scale in the space. So this hangs at about 4 feet off the ground. It's much larger and lower than your average chandelier. And the way the silicone interacts with it was also something kind of new to me. The kind of fleshy, toned, warty gourds that you see on the sculpture. Some of them are pierced, which I hadn't really done before. I think a lot about the relationship that the kind of metal and other material I'm using has, and usually it's kind of stretched or pulled or squeezed, and I hadn't really pierced anything before. So this was pretty fun for me in that way.
So we see the development, and one of the things when we spoke in New York a few weeks ago, you told me that never had like preparatory sketches or drawings that you worked with the metal directly.
Yeah, I usually find that the way I work, it's much easier for me to work in to scale, basically, rather than kind of trying to transform a drawing. I'll usually bend if it's something like this sculpture that has, you know, six similar legs, I'll usually try to bend a first leg and then weld it together and trace that for all the other legs rather than working on a small drawing and going from there. It's much easier for me to think in 3D and to scale than it is for me to try to translate an idea into 2 dimensions and a much smaller size. So probably, I think it makes the process in the moment of figuring something out more exciting, but it also probably makes it a little harder. So,
Yeah, but
yeah.
I found it fascinating that you actually the ideas come together with the manipulation of the material and
Mhm.
not the way we're used to having someone make a drawing and then think about it in another way. So this is this bright, strange greenish color. Another chair dress, bird that you made a year after you made the one that we had. And, you know, this choice of color is something that you also began experimenting with, right?
Yeah, so this is actually from a few years before I made the one. We might have the caption a little funny, but it doesn't matter. But the this choice of color was new to me, and the reason I say it's a few years before is because I actually think the one that you have in the show is kind of an advancement of this one. I was thinking about these as kind of dresses already, but hadn't come up with the idea of kind of incorporating that earlier pink bodysuit chair and this kind of chair back into one to bring these kind of walking sculptures to life even more by putting a dress on them.
Mm.
Um, so it certainly has a relationship to the piece in the show, and I think of it as almost a precursor. These were the first kind of walking chair pieces that I made.
Right, right. And then in the performance, you have walking people.
Yes.
So this is an installation view of the exhibition you had in Chicago, in the Arts Club of Chicago in 21 through 22. And I think we have some details. We'll see these incredible high heel shoes and this kind of dress chandelier. Here we see it. So like almost like a corset, you know, a certain period piece, right? With the trying to close it here.
Yeah, so for this show, this was my exhibition at the Arts Club of Chicago. And what really struck me even before I visited the space and seeing images was the kind of very reflective nature of the black polished floor, which you can kind of see in the installation photos. And I liked the idea of creating work that played with that reflection. So for this piece in particular, if you think of the chandelier as kind of wearing a dress, which I kind of tried to emphasize with the corset design on the silicone, you get almost an up the skirt view of the dress in the floor reflections. And this was also a piece where I had or where I decided to use the kind of claws we talked about and create a real pulling motion. To me, the previous chandelier we looked at and this one both have something kind of almost Cinderella-like to them. So there's some kind of like play or whimsy in the metal forms themselves. But this show also in particular was interesting to me because it was the first time I had brought the kind of floor-bound claw feet that we see in the piece at the Rose to these stilt sculptures. And that really came from thinking about the idea of those pointed feet interacting with that particular floor. And then in that show at the Arts Club, I had really thought about the idea of someone walking in them. And I eventually was able to get someone who worked at the Arts Club to stand on them for a photo and had wanted to do a performance, but just hadn't figured out a way to. And it took me years to be able to have the opportunity again to get someone to actually move around in those things. But the kind of beginning of that idea was all based on kind of the visceral experience of seeing someone move on this floor. I kind of thought about, I grew up in New York City, and if you've ever seen like a small dog run across the floor at Grand Central or in a building with like a polished marble lobby, you'll see that they kind of like run and then slide at the end. Their feet kind of skitter across the floor. So I liked the idea of bringing that moment of material interaction from the sculpture to the space itself.
Right. And spoiler alert, we're going to revisit the Hannah's vision of a performance with those stilts. So the the stilts and this kind of structure that's more like a fancy tent or I don't know. It's pretty amazing. I love the silicone here. Was included in the Venice Biennale that Cecilia Alemani curated in 2022. Um, did you want to say something about the exhibition or this slide, or should we move to this slide, which includes another work?
Yeah, I think we can keep going. This installation was important to me for a lot of reasons. Obviously, the opportunity to show in Venice was a really amazing one. The kind of tent sculptures allowed me to play with the kind of tightness and material tension of the silicone in a way I hadn't before, and the kind of um, the scale was something that was an exciting development for me. That's 13 feet long, and I had kind of envisioned the profile of that piece as looking like a bat wing, which was I was getting very into the kind of physical structure of bats and the fact that they're the only animal that has a flesh wing, and thinking of that as almost a ready-made version of my sculptures, and that their skin is like stretched so tight over this like bony, thin armature. But then additionally, this piece, the large piece you see in the foreground, I had originally wanted to make in glass, and the idea of showing glass in Venice was very exciting to me. And although it didn't end up happening for this piece, you'll see that since Venice, basically, glass has played a much larger role in the way that I work going forward.
Mhm. So here are a close-up of these feet. I love that the high heel shoes have spurs on them, so connoting horses and riders and big birds and pain and humor and Cinderella all in one, right? And then we'll come back to those crutches or whatever we call them. We have a few installation views of the show titled Hannah Levy Crutch. That was Casey Kaplan Gallery. in 2023. So um, we'll show you some of these elements in addition to the by now familiar, um, what shall we call them?
I call them stilts. Yeah.
So the stilts, that will be a code word. We have these other elements all around that look like a bar that you might hold, and the crutches, and they begin to speak to another element in your work that we did not discuss until now, and that's not just furniture, but medical equipment that's often made from this same tubing. Um, would you like to speak to that?
Yeah. I mean, I think the kind of medical equipment you're talking about relates to the idea that body anxiety has always been a big focus in my work or played a big role in it. In this show, it's maybe more apparent than some because the kind of the metal vine forms you see on the wall are based on handrails, and the kind of handrails, particularly adaptive handrails that you might see in buildings and public spaces. And then I have these kind of precariously perched um, glass. They're actually casts of warty gourds, but they're kind of flesh-like and fragile and appear to be precariously balanced. And the kind of jumping off point for this exhibition was these stilts that I spoke about earlier. So when I first made them at the end of 2021, I had really wanted a performer to walk in them. And then this exhibition at Casey Kaplan, I was kind of thinking about some non-existent character that the show would be designed around, who would be the wearer of these stilts. And the idea that they would need this kind of adaptive equipment to move around the space and creating kind of the most precarious version of that adaptive equipment by bringing this, the natural element of the thorns, but then also these very precariously placed glass gourds was something I was interested in. And my work has always had this relationship to body anxiety and medical equipment. But also, I had my dad had a mobility disease. He had passed away from a mobility disease a few years earlier, and seeing the way that these often overlooked kind of elements of our design environment can become so vital to somebody who needs it was something, interesting to me as someone who, has always been interested in design and these kind of looked over elements that exist in our built environment.
Yeah. So I wanna talk in general about body anxiety and this idea that sometimes the devices that are supposed to help you or heal you are also painful. So anyone who's ever done physiotherapy knows that it is really painful, even though eventually it does help you heal. But also using glass. We talked about the silicone mimicking human skin, but the glass is here also looks like part of the flesh, and it's very fragile, but it's also very resilient and strong. And that kind of duality that and tension that we discussed that appears in it's kind of an integral part of many of your artworks. Um, this is also part of the crutch, and here this very large. I said, it looks like thrown for a witch or something because the sharpness really hurts when you look at it. I mean,
Yeah, I think of it as something between like a high chair, kind of a medical portable commode, and then also the kind of style it's designed in takes some aesthetic choices from like Art Nouveau
yeah,
metalwork.
yeah,
Um, so the idea was to create like what, so if someone's in these stilts, how do they like sit on something or use the bathroom, and then also bringing in kind of a medical device into it. But I think it's interesting what you said about the medical devices often causing pain, but it's not just medical devices, it's also gym equipment, right? So in
mm,
order to kind of grow or heal the body, there is often some kind of temporary pain for kind of long-term healing or improvement.
yeah,
And I think that that kind of constantly changing nature of bodies is something I've always been very interested in and continue to be interested in. And the idea, specifically these handrails, had always been something that interested me because I know from uh, you know, uh, listening to architects and other people involved in the design of buildings that often the kind of ADA compliance protocols are seen as a hindrance to design rather than like an opportunity.
mm,
And there is something funny about it. I think maybe some of that resistance comes from uh, kind of people don't always want to acknowledge that uh, even if you don't find these devices useful at the moment, um, for almost all of us, they will be useful at some point, and it might be this resistance to putting them in spaces. Maybe it's just out of practicality, but maybe it's also kind of a reminder of kind of our universal mortality and eventual decline
mm,
of our physical bodies, assuming you don't already need these mobility aids that might kind of contribute to that resistance. And that's been
yeah.
something interesting to me, or interesting, not necessarily to comment on, but more to kind of play with and explore that resistance or the tension that exists there.
Well, if we're lucky and we live to an old age, we will experience some forms of disability or diseases. It's part of the human condition. And I think there is denial when people are starting out. They think disability belongs to someone else and not to themselves.
Yeah,
And
able-bodiedness is almost always temporary, basically.
yeah, and able, ableism is real. We know that. I'm cognizant of the time, so I think that we will perhaps uh, move to some of these other elements in Crutch. Again, your use of glass and how the glass is kind of trapped within these. And Art Nouveau is a really, yeah, they do look like Art Nouveau except a little creepier. I meant that in a good way, Hannah.
Oh, I took it in a good way. Yeah. So with
Okay.
these pieces, I can try to talk about them more quickly, but they were based on these. The shape is based on a Hoyer lift, which is a lift that supports the body of someone who is bedbound or unable to stand on their own and can bring them from a chair to a bed or vice versa. But I also was playing with their similarity to some other forms, and particularly was looking at the work of Hector Guimard and the Paris subway stations that he's so famous for. Uh,
Metro.
yes, sorry. And those forms had always been very attractive to me, and bringing kind of his aesthetic into these forms was really an exciting challenge. And then the glass in these pieces was also kind of a big turning point for me, and that it was the first time that I had blown glass into a welded metal cage. And it's something I've returned to in the years since this exhibition a lot.
Right. And it really looks like flesh that can't be contained sometimes, like the little bulges that you have there.
Yeah, the relationship that that the kind of silicone I was using has to the metal was always exciting to me, and that if it looks like it's being pulled or pressed or pushed, that's really because that's what's happening in the silicone. And using glass in the way that I did in this show and try to continue to do was exciting in a similar way, and that that moment of expansion that you see in a piece like this and the tension between the two materials exists, and it's because of movement, but that movement is essentially kind of trapped or frozen in time. Whereas with the silicone, it's kind of continually acted upon. With the glass, that moment of action, yeah, essentially freezes.
Mm. So this is your London show. That's very recent in Massimo De Carlo. I think it's from
2024.
2024, end of 2024. So tell us about it. I have a few installation shots, and it's
So this
remarkable.
was the first show that I had kind of combined glass and silicone. And in the same way, I kind of spoke about my Casey Kaplan show being for some like unknown person who was walking through in the stilts. I kind of thought of this show for these strange creatures that sat in the back room. These two sculptures are also caged glass work, so glass is blown directly into those metal forms. Um, and one thing about this exhibition that was really felt like an exciting opportunity to me was the space that it was in. So these green walls and chandeliers and kind of uh, intricate patterns in the molding were all things that were in the space to begin with. And I tried to create pieces that kind of made sense in this like very particular domestic interior that is the Massimo De Carlo London space. And then I wanted to kind of accentuate the strangeness of the space even more by adding this green carpet that was the same color as the walls, and in my opinion, kind of changed these shiny sculptural objects I was putting in and transformed them into almost existing in their own jewelry box world.
And here's some close-ups of them decontextualized, so not within that green, kind of strange green space. And they look, the creatures look more like huge bugs or something.
Mhm.
And this, has a spidery feeling, but not quite because um, yeah, it doesn't look like anything that we know, but it looks strangely alive. Here we see it within the space, which is quite incredible. And you go back to the chair motif, but quite different.
Yeah, so it's another kind of precarious and too thin for a body silicone chair, similar to what's in the exhibition.
Yeah. And this one where, the two hands are or talons are kind of grasping this thing. But it also looks really sharp, like a pin, and the general kind of shape, for me, I told you it looks almost like a uterus, suggestive of internal organs as well. And this is very recent, 2025.
Yeah, that was from the beginning of the year. The kind of gesture or grasping of the hands around the glass felt kind of new and exciting to me because, like I said, glass is a relatively new material to introduce into my work, and being able to get the kind of feeling of grip or gesture into this new material has been kind of an exciting and new process for me.
So now we're fulfilling the promise of the stilts. We
Yeah.
have you, please go on.
No, so it took 3 years from the time that I first made the stilts and wanted a performer to walk in them to the kind of getting that dream to come to life. So I made these stilts and crutches and a walker, basically, for two performers. And then had a performance that was choreographed by Sigrid Lauren at the ICA Philadelphia, which we can see a clip of. But yeah, it had been a long time coming, and I was so excited to get to see someone with as much skills as Eliza and Sigrid, the two performers, had uh, activate these pieces.
So let's see a little bit from the performance.
And the audio is also by Sigrid.
So this is the last part of it, and I just want to say that walking with a crutch, and this looks like one of the, like a walker as well, yet they're balanced, bringing back the body that is kind of an absent presence in the other sculptures because but also I think that it speaks to the audience's desire to physically interact with your sculptures. You know, here apparently you want them to do that as well. So I am really, really sorry that our time is up, and really, really happy that that you joined us today, Hannah. And is there anything else that excites you and that you're working on now before we sign off?
Well, thank you so much for having me. Yeah, I mean, my next show is in Sardinia at Museum Nivola, which is dedicated to Constantino Nivola, and so that's what I'm focusing on at the moment, and I'm very excited about horseshoe crabs right now, so I can sign off with that.